Grace and peace to you, my friends. The good news of Mark's gospel takes shape at unexpected places and in startling ways for Jesus' followers. Last week I had mentioned that the names of towns and states and bodies of water in Mark's gospel are far more than GPS coordinates from the time. The geographical names convey meaning about theology, power, and politics. Today's lectionary story, is right in the middle. It's exactly halfway through the gospel, and it's at a geographical crossroads for Jesus and his followers. Up until now, Jesus has been traversing the Holy Land, crisscrossing the Sea of Galilee, going from one town to another. And in that time, Jesus builds a reputation for overcoming the forces of religion and politics, bodily ailments and hunger, and seeing people face to face, eye to eye, and caring for everyone along his path. Now, his followers have left whatever safety that you might imagine that they had in their home turf, as they are now heading towards a city in the north. And where they're heading is an outpost that has been a home for differing nationalities over centuries. And in that particular place, they have worshiped pagan gods for decades. So they're approaching a temple that was built most recently by Herod the Great, and he dedicated this temple to Rome and to the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire, a man who added to his name not just Caesar, but Caesar, son of the divine. So as Jesus' entourage is now skirting around the city and it's starting to attract a lot of curiosity seekers, the disciples' tension must have been rising. What is Jesus going to do in this place that proclaims Caesar as God? So I invite you to imagine yourself as either one of his followers because you've been along with him across the sea, you've fed multitudes, or maybe you're one of those curiosity seekers that came out from the city and you're curious as to what he has to say. And before I read what comes next, please let's invite God's Spirit to be with us in this story. Please pray with me. Dear God, like the disciples, we find ourselves at crossroads all the time. We feel the tug of lies that masquerade as truth, and we hear the claims of small gods who seek our loyalty, and we know the stories of Jesus' divine power to heal. Silence any of the noise around us that distracts. And as we approach your holy word, give us the naivete to hear it as if for the first time. And give us the courage to accept the truth it calls us to live today. Amen. I invite you to listen for God's living word as I read from the Gospel of Mark, the 8th chapter. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answer him, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others might say you're one of the prophets." And he asks them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers him, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus sternly orders them not to tell anyone about him. And then Jesus begins to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and 3 days later will rise again. Jesus says all of this quite openly, and Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebukes Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus calls the crowd with his disciples and says to them, "If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? For those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in glory to his Father with the holy angels. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Have you ever played the game Two Truths and a Lie? It's a common icebreaker game that you can play in any age. As the name implies, you're supposed to share 3 things about yourself. You come up with 2 true statements to describe your past, your personality, your skills, or anything that you want to share that in fact are true, and then you want to share something, you make up something that would be considered false. And then you invite someone else to wade between the truths and the lie. Now, the intent of the game is to ease conversation because oftentimes we're a little shy to talk to people we don't know. So it's supposed to ease you into conversation so you connect with one another. It's really not about winning. And the fun of the game comes when you disguise a truth as a lie or embed a truth within your lie. So yes, I'm twisting those things. I recall playing this game long ago. It was at a work-related cocktail reception, and I worked for a firm in Boston, but I still lived in Chicago. It was long ago, and I was quietly and fearfully considering going into ministry. No one there knew about it. In fact, I hadn't even told my family. Most of my colleagues were East Coast Ivy Leaguers, and we always laughed about the gulf between us because I was that foreigner from the Midwest. So over a glass of wine, these were my 2 icebreaker truths and 1 lie. I said, I know how to can tomato juice, whole tomatoes, and tomato sauce. I study theology, and I love to run with my dog along the lakefront in Chicago. A few colleagues knew that I'd braved Boston's cold to run along the Charles River, but they didn't really know if I had a dog. Is that a truth or a lie? It didn't really matter because either way we could talk about pets, exercise, or the city or travels. Much to my mom's dismay, after an entire childhood of peeling and cooking tomatoes and working in a hot kitchen during humid August summer months without any air conditioning, I will say, I no longer know how to get a basket full of tomatoes into sterilized mason jars and have it be safe. There's something about the thing that's supposed to top. I don't remember. And even though that is a lie, I shared a truth about my values and created an opening to talk about the farm and my mom and cooking. Since religion and politics were taboo topics in the office, no one guessed theology as a truth. But notice I said theology. And even in that truth, I avoided admitting to them and myself this scary path to ministry. It was a half-truth at best. And then if memory serves me correctly, at the conclusion of that, people would then excuse themselves to refresh their drink. So let's imagine Jesus engages his disciples in some version of this game. Because very importantly, in the first century, it was the community's perception about you that mattered most, not who you proclaimed yourself to be. The community defined your identity and your vocation. So Jesus' questions become a vital measure to lay bare any misconceptions about him for the others as they continue in his ministry. So Jesus is doing a simple icebreaker to begin with as well. He begins by a safer query of the infamous they people. You know, that anonymous group of they that you can hide behind. I've never met a person named they, but we talk about what they say all the time. So he asks no one in particular, from all the accumulated hearsay on the roads, who do they say that I am? It's a low-risk question. So the disciples are milling about and they offer ideas. They shout out, well, other people might confuse him with some version of the late John the Baptist. John the Baptist was killed shortly after Jesus' ministry began. Others might think he's the long-awaited Elijah, or still others might think he's just one of those prophets in a long line of them. Truth or lies? Jesus sharpens the question, though, with who do you, putting each one of them on the spot, who do you say that I am? Because then, as now, it's never sufficient to rely upon someone else's answer. Because at some point, everyone must decide for themselves who Jesus is. Faith is entirely personal. It's intimate with you and Jesus. Yes, that man walked this earth. So you need to have a relationship with Jesus and with God and the Spirit, because that's with whom we trust our lives. Now, from what they'd witnessed, his longtime followers could have easily listed, you're a healer, you're a miracle worker, a pastor, a prophet, a teacher, a rebel, and so forth. All of those are true, but they are not enough. And maybe that's when they begin to realize how limited their understanding is. And maybe Jesus allows for an awkward silence. But Peter speaks, and oh my God, I love Peter. I just love Peter. He is brave. He never gives up. He's brave, and he says, you are the Messiah. For centuries, the Israelite people prayed and waited for a Messiah. And in this single word, Peter recognizes Jesus as the anointed one, the promised deliverer, the one ordained by God to save God's people. And we should never let time soften that subversive confession. Because remember, they're standing in the shadows. They're walking toward Caesarea Philippi, toward a temple dedicated to Augustus, who identifies himself as the Son of the Divine, who happens to have a big army in tow. And he has built a stronghold upon oppressing, enslaving, and controlling the Jewish people. The contrast couldn't be more vivid. Against Caesar, Peter sees Jesus as the promised Messiah. And he believes as they walk toward that profane, repugnant temple, they will conquer it. You know what? Peter's partly right and a lot wrong. Peter has watched Jesus heal the underdogs, the outcasts, the people that society has literally thrown away. And he has heard Jesus talk of the plans to turn upside down the power structures so that everybody wins. So Peter has this dream of a success story that unfolds with glory, but the glory he sees is possible only with a military victory. And that's what Jesus knows is behind him, and that's what fosters their heated arguments. And in that sideline rebuke between the two of them, notice that Jesus doesn't cast Peter away. He just says, get behind me, Satan. Now, Satan is anything that comes between you and God. So he's saying, just get behind me, follow me, watch and listen. Later, Peter will see Jesus enter Jerusalem on a donkey, not a war horse. Peter will understand what it means to liberate and not dominate, to restore and unite, but never to destroy. You know, I've been talking about the Gospel of Mark as perceived by the early Christians as the image of a lion, so you're going to see that lion throughout these next couple of months. So Peter is imagining a lion with canines bared, and you're going to go rip Caesar to shreds with superior force. That's probably what Peter has thought. But Jesus does come as a lion. So imagine it's the lion, though, of Aslan, from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, who puts his power towards the good of others, who suffers humiliation and death for the sake of others. That's the lion we have here, one of immense power and great service. Jesus overthrows violence with a more subversive and enduring form of resistance by opening his hands in love, not closing it into a balled fist. And Jesus calls his followers to do the same. But on that dusty road, about halfway through, nobody wants to believe him. 2 more times, Jesus makes the exact same prediction. He professes that he is the Son of the Divine. He will suffer, he will die, and he will rise. And even after 3 times, the disciples run from the cross and doubt the women on Easter. Thank God for the disciples and Peter, because they let us imagine ourselves in this story, because it is hard to imagine. You know, it's easier to believe that a Messiah will come sometime in the future, because a future Messiah makes no demands right now. But a Messiah that's right in your face calls you to attend to your life right here and now. And that's where we are right now. Because this was Peter's crisis of faith, and it's our crisis of faith today, because we are with them in that story. So what kind of a Messiah will we give our lives to? We are at the turning point. How willing are we to look past the billboards of our culture that loom as powerful as that temple in Caesarea Philippi? How willing are we to look past the billboards that promise easy fixes without us relinquishing any of our trappings of success? How willing are we to casually ignore the blatant lies for the sake of just getting along and not ruffling feathers, or at least for so long as to not let my family be targeted and hurt? Jesus' truth requires letting go of whatever others might think we need to be, of letting go of what the world might tell us we need to be. Jesus' truth requires letting go of what others think about him. Because his truth invites us to see how flimsy the world's promises are. And his truth invites us to lose ourselves for his sake, because he never abandons us. One way to understand this is through St. Augustine. He was the first to describe sin as life curved in on itself. It's living a life only for yourself. That's sin, in Augustine's definition. But the saving grace of the cross lets us see how that kills the rest of the world. The saving grace of the cross calls us to know that there is a new life for us now, and that we can leave that old life behind. That's a helpful image for conceiving what Jesus is getting at when he speaks of losing and saving our lives. What's the for the sake of that animates us? Are we living for ourselves, trying to save ourselves, amass our own fortune, amass our own power? Then we're curved in and we're fighting with other people with closed fists. Or are we living for one another? Are we living for the neighborhood, and more importantly, for somebody else's neighborhood? Are we living for the good news of God's love and mercy? If that's the case, then we're curved outward with open hands and a loving heart. We're halfway through Mark's gospel, and this is the weighty moment when the question is asked us as Jesus questions Peter. Are you living for human things or for divine things? Last week we had a friend from England staying with us for several days. He was a longtime friend of my husband, someone I've gotten to know, and we could have some real candid conversations. This man actually lived in Pittsburgh and went to high school in Mount Lebanon. I mean, talk about a small world, who would have ever known? But long time, lifelong friends. But sometimes it takes an outsider to startle us with what we've become immune of the toxic way in which we live. So he was with us for several days, and we were watching the nightly news the first night, and he became visibly shaken by the political commercials. I mean, he literally is shouting at us and at them, One ad directly denies the truth of the other. I mean, 2 ads within a minute say different things. He said, how do you know what to believe? And is anyone telling the truth? We need to ask ourselves that. We shouldn't wait for some outsider to say, are you guys kidding me? You're listening to this? The South Hills are in many ways a Caesarea Philippi because we have billboards and lawn signs, and that's temporary for the time being, but we have brands and temptations that claim our attention, our resources, and our devotion. And despite the presumed sophistication that we think we've achieved, we cannot underestimate the damage done when lies masquerade as truth. We cannot underestimate the hard work that it takes to reclaim our fidelity to Jesus' good news. Who we think Jesus is will determine how much we let these messages sway us towards the worldly trappings of power and success. What we think of Jesus will determine how much we might say those messages are lies. We in the South Hills are privileged and powerful. If not us, who? Like the disciples, we need to hear from Jesus again and again his truth. And we need to hear it in this faith community because we need one another. We need the safety and security of being vulnerable and humble here. We need the safety and security of knowing that we have a life that matters. We have a faith that matters. And we need one another so that together we can proclaim the paradoxical good news, because the good news comes to us through the cross and the grave and an empty tomb that turns us outward to live for other people. Our Messiah, the Messiah of our cross, the Messiah of the resurrection, it is Jesus who gives us a truth that stands the test of time. May it be so, my friends.